You are now listening to
Chakras and Shotguns. Welcome to Chakras and Shotguns, the podcast that guides you on a journey of spiritual development and personal preparedness. I'm Jen, a former lawyer, now yoga instructor, and lover of all things wellness.
And I'm Mick, a marketer, Reiki master, and prepper. Last episode, we talked about some red flags in New Age spirituality. So how are you supposed to sort through what's true, what's a gimmick, and what's outright toxic? In today's episode, we're giving tips and tricks to help you build your discernment.
But before we get into that, we want to encourage you to sign up for our Patreon. We have exclusive content, merch discounts, and private sessions with me or Mick.
All right, let's begin as we always do with the breathwork meditation to put us into a mindful place.
Go ahead and find a comfortable seat. You can always lie down. You can also get into child's pose if you're familiar with that yoga pose. And let's start to connect to the breath. Inhale through your nose. Expand your belly. And exhale that breath out of your mouth. Let's do another together. Inhale through your nose. And exhale that breath out of your mouth. One more together. Inhale through your nose. And seal your lips and exhale that breath out back through your nose. Allow yourself to breathe normally in and out, matching your inhales to your exhales. If you're in child's pose with your forehead rested on the ground, start to massage your third eye, gently swaying your head back and forth. If you're lying down or sitting down, you can use your first two fingers on each hand and give yourself a little massage on your third eye. Your third eye is the seat of your intuition. It comes with the intrinsic right of being able to see. And for today, I'd like to set the intention of clarity. Being able to see the truth and the reality of things. Allow yourself to see a ball of violet light directly in between your eyebrows. And see what information comes up for you. What feelings or sensations you might have in your body. What thoughts bubble up to the surface. Allow yourself to feel gratitude for this superpower, this ability to see. And your ability to trust yourself and trust what you see in front of you. Take one more deep inhale through your nose. And exhale that breath out through your mouth, completely letting anything that doesn't serve you go. All right, let's get into the rest of the show.
Thanks, Jen. Another dope breath work as usual.
Thank you.
Let's get into the main topic. Like we said, this is part 2 to our last episode, episode 92, where we talked about problematic things that can come up in your spiritual journey in this kind of space of New Age spirituality. So that includes things like spiritual bypassing, manipulation, religious zealotry, and even cults. If you haven't already listened to that episode, definitely would recommend hitting pause and going back to check that out first. Today, we're going to talk more about how you can kind of double check with yourself and discern which sources are accurate or helpful to you. Also, shout out to Yasmin, who DM'd us with this very question and was the inspiration for us creating this episode.
Yeah, I think it's a good time to say if there's something that you want us to talk about that we haven't talked about before, slide on into them DMs and we'll take a look. All right, as a reminder, we're going to quickly define New Age spirituality again so we know what we're working with here. And remember, this is just for today's discussion. You don't have to label yourself anything that you don't want to. So, New Age spirituality is a diverse and often loosely defined contemporary spiritual movement characterized by an eclectic blend of metaphysical beliefs, self-help practices, and a focus on personal transformation, often drawing from various mystical, esoteric, and Eastern traditions. It typically emphasizes concepts such as holistic healing, spiritual evolution, and the power of the individual to manifest their reality. And it includes a lot of the topics we often talk about on the show, like crystals, tarot, manifestation, etc.
All right, now that we have that out of the way. So let's say you're new on your spiritual journey, or maybe you've been on your journey a while, but you want to learn more about some particular topic. So where do you go? Maybe you check out Twitter, TikTok. TikTok is like the new search engine, right?
Yeah.
Or you go old school with Google. Let's say, I mean, it's old school at this point. Google been around for 30 years.
But like, I remember when Google came to be.
Yeah.
In my day, it cost a nickel to go to the movies.
All right. So let's say you're scrolling through some Reels or TikToks and one of your favorite voices, influencers tells you that there's some health supplement to take, or there's some pose you need to try, or, that there is a black hole that is being opened by an organization in Europe next month. What do? Do you just take it for what it is, accept it as truth? Do you go buy that supplement? Do you start telling all your friends and family about the new black hole? Like, what do you do?
Yeah. And so you see something, you're like, oh my gosh, this is exactly what I need. And oh, this is amazing. And oh my gosh, I can't believe that this is something that happened or that's true. And you immediately go to hit share. Like, oh, look at this video. Or you turn to your partner that's sitting next to you and you tell them about this crazy fact or perspective that you just heard. Now, when I see something like that, I do like to put a caveat on it before I even start repeating. So I might say, now these are Twitter facts. Now these are TikTok facts. And then I'll tell what I heard, but that's a heads up. Like, look, I just saw somebody say this on Twitter. I'm not vouching its credibility because anyone can get on the internet and say anything. This topic made me think about the couple of times that I've seen something and almost fell for it.
Mm-hmm.
I randomly got a video on TikTok, it just popped up in my For You page of this woman talking about why Marjorie Harvey is divorcing Steve Harvey. And I kind of watched it for a little bit and I was like, really? I just really didn't ever see that coming. And something told me, let me go to Google and see if this is true. Nobody's reporting on it.
Yeah.
Except one boo-boo website.
Yeah.
Which is immediately a red flag. This man hosts Family Feud. People ain't gonna talk about it.
Yeah.
And so then when I went back to the girl's page and started looking through the comments, people were like, well, I'm not seeing this anywhere else. And she was like, oh, well, it was just a hypothetical. Girl, you were doing this for clicks and likes and views.
Yeah,
Stop it.
Yeah.
Cut it out.
That's the point. People will do anything for clout, right? They want people to come to their page. So they will make salacious claims, come to their YouTube page. They're getting money every time, they get the certain number of engagements. If they have a certain number of followers and a certain number of views, like they're getting money from these.
But now she gaslighting people in her comments talking about, I was just like, imagine if. Girl, for fairy tale, she said entertainment purposes only. Okay.
It's tricky though, right? Like, so, because what you're doing is you're relying on your own internal discernment. And so if you're trying to calibrate your discernment, it can be kind of difficult to figure that out, right? I know for me, I was seeing things that were like obviously wrong to me. Like recently there was the whole emergency alert system thing that happened. I think it was like October 4th, where there was FEMA, I think was the government agency that was releasing that signal essentially to everybody's cell phone. And there were all these videos on TikTok and YouTube. They're basically saying that we were going to become zombies once this signal went out, and that you should try to like go into the woods to avoid the signal and don't bring your phone or anything. And they were saying if you got the COVID vaccine, then it was going to activate something in your DNA. And it was just a whole thing.
Remember when Black people were supposed to get superpowers on December 21st? A few years ago?
That's exactly what it reminded me of. But that's more fun. I mean, I'd rather a superpower than become a zombie, right?
That was a fun time on Twitter.
So anyway, to me, that was like clearly BS. Now, maybe some folks bought into that, I'm gonna try to help you a little bit in this episode to be able to calibrate your discernment some.
This is a safe space.
I will talk about a time that I actually did hear something that was wrong that I believed. So there's a lot of accounts out here that do these quote unquote plant hacks. And I've talked before about how during the pandemic, I became a plant daddy. I was outside gardening, I had indoor plants. I got all this stuff that I'm like trying to grow. And then there was one particular creator, I'm not gonna go in on him, but he was promoting banana water. And banana water is basically when you take some banana peels, you chop them up, you put it into a jar of water, you let the water kind of absorb, what's going on with the banana peel in there for like a day or two, and then you pour that water into your plants. So then I did that, right? And I was like, okay, yeah, my plant's really about to get these nutrients. Thankfully, though, I saw some videos that were completely disproving it. And when I actually listened to what the videos that were disproving it were saying, I was like, dang, I was really dumb to believe this. So basically, plants can't absorb nutrients through water like that. Like the only way plants can actually absorb nutrients is if there is some breakdown of the organic material, which is essentially what composting is, right? Like you put scraps in a pile and you let microorganisms break those down. So then that compost can then be used to allow plants to absorb those nutrients. You're not just going to get that from taking some human food and soaking it in some water and throwing it in the soil. Like it makes sense. But like at the time I was like, oh, this dude is really promoting this. Like he's got millions of followers and people are doing this. And really all you're doing is bringing gnats into your soil.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah. We got those gnats up out of here.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Please let the record reflect that I never liked that guy. I thought he was extremely chaotic. It was something about him that I found to be very off-putting.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll get more into this later.
Mm-hmm. Jen's intuition was completely right on that situation. I was like, nah, he got all the followers and he sound like his plants look good. I'm trying to be like him.
But then also I could have talked myself out of that and been like, you're a curmudgeon. You don't like the style of this guy's videos. He's just not your cup of tea. Turn out he was not doing his research. He was just getting up there saying anything.
He got a book now too.
I bet he does. Full of lies. So to that point of being confronted with information like this, I think if we're going to talk about it, we have to evaluate opinion versus fact, right? If it's someone's opinion, some self-help advice, what would be the consequence or result of you adopting that in your life? So if you hear someone say, talk to yourself like you would talk to a dear loved one, the consequence might be that you talk to yourself amazingly and discover deeper self-love, which I guess is not terrible, right?
Yes. But alternatively, some of this self-help advice can be a little bit out there. So let's say, somebody's saying people who watch John Wick movies are evil. And if you know anyone that watches John Wick movies, you should cut them off based purely on that alone, right? Well, that could have some bigger consequences, right? It's different from just, talking to yourself lovingly. Now you like starting to affect and potentially harm relationships with your friends and loved ones.
Yeah. And that can be tricky too, because I think especially in America and probably like the Western world, and we're seeing that with current events going on right now, there has been for a very long time, oh, you should be fair and you should be objective and you should see both sides of things.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the further out that people get into these more extreme views, it's like, actually, no, we should not entertain both sides of certain things.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you want another opinion about something, I think you should definitely try and seek to find that out, but you're trying to find the truth. And I think sometimes objectivity can downplay the truth of something, if that makes sense. So for like example, when those cishet white men with tiki torches rolled up in Charlottesville years ago, and Trump was like, there are good people on both sides. And it was like, no, there were white supremacists and there were people minding their business, or people who were actively combating hate. Like, there is no both sides to that. So if you're trying to be objective and say like, this group of people is really frustrated with diversity efforts, et cetera, and this other group felt like they were propagating white supremacy, I guess that's subjective, but it's like, there were some hateful ass people and there were people who were like, we're not going to tolerate that. That's the truth, right? So trying to figure out what's objective, what's not biased, what's truthful, that can be a lot of work, especially if you're new to an issue. But getting into fact, right? Steve Harvey and his wife are getting divorced. That's not true. That has not been reported on. Or some of the earlier examples, this yoga pose is great for your outer hips. This supplement is great for your adrenal glands. On this day, this collider is going to open a black hole and we're going to jump into another timeline. Shout out to episode 55 and the time episode. That was actually a theory that, honestly, going into that episode, we were like, oh my gosh, we should totally do an episode on this. And then we really started looking into it and it was like, that's not quite true what we're hearing about jumping timelines or whatever. So we somewhat debunked what was going around on social media. If it's something health related that you're seeing that maybe you want to start doing, I would recommend proceeding with a ton of caution. You may be taking other medications. It may affect you in a weird way. You're getting dosages off of, someone else's recommendation who is more than likely not a medical professional. So you don't want to start taking something that could interact badly with you or anything else that you're taking.
Yeah. And I think for most of these things, you can Google a lot, right? Like you can look up the yoga pose to see exactly which muscle groups it's targeting. You can, the episode on time, we went in looking for supporting evidence as to what the organization was doing with the collider machine and ended up not finding anything to back up that they were opening up black holes or that we had the potential of collapsing timelines.
Yeah. And also doing the exercise of what is the consequence if I believe that this is true and I adopt it for myself, or even if it's untrue and I spread it to someone else. I also think about, remember that rumor that Tommy Hilfiger went on Oprah and said that he did not make clothes for black people? And that was never the case.
And that might as well have been the gospel in my community.
That was everywhere. Everywhere. I know someone, it was a family member. She told me she saw the episode. It never happened. Maybe she was in a different timeline. I don't know. So now you got this fact and you're like, something's telling you, is this true? Should I Google this? You still need to use discernment even when you're Googling or looking things up. You want to look for articles from sources that you know. The Google algorithm does a pretty good job at ranking more credible and relevant sites at the top of search rankings. So if you get a bunch of hits on this little fact that you saw online and it's from like mbop.net. You're going to be like, who is that? And it's never a website you've been to.
Mm-hmm.
I would be skeptical. And despite the criticisms of mainstream media, you're actually still more likely to find factually correct information on sites like CNN, MSNBC, New York Times, etc., than random YouTube channels. And one big reason for that is due to capitalism, these companies have a huge interest in huge legal departments to make sure that they're not being sued for printing outright false information. Because back in the day, it used to be career ending if someone had to be like, you know what, I reported on this and it was completely incorrect.
Yeah, but at the same time, we're not saying to just believe everything that, big media companies say. A lot of times they will spin things to fit a narrative. We've seen this over and over and over again. So make sure you're reading between the lines. You're not just taking information from a headline, right? Headlines a lot of times will lean information into one political direction or the other, or try to communicate something that is not entirely factual. So yeah, I would just have some discretion in approaching some of those articles. For certain facts and stories, you might want to try cross-referencing information. One example of this, right, was when the Surgeon General back in 2020, right around the time of the start of the pandemic, there was this message around, we don't need to wear masks to avoid this virus and stop the spread, right? For me, that didn't make sense immediately. I was like, so you're telling me there's an airborne pathogen, but we don't need to wear masks to prevent this? I was like, that doesn't make any sense. So I was just like, I'm Googling, why do surgeons wear masks during surgery? And why do doctors wear masks in certain settings, like in the tuberculosis unit, right? Other airborne pathogens where we see medical professionals taking certain precautions. Why is that different from COVID? I'm just doing my own independent research. And pretty much that led me to being one of the only cats wearing masks very early in March 2020. I had the N95s on deck. Jen, I had a whole box of them before they started selling out and everything. I was ready to go. And that was before most people even knew what an N95 was. That's that prepper thing.
That was, and you were prepared. You were. We also want to talk about books for a moment. We mention a lot of books on the show, but just because something is published does not mean that it is the truth, okay? Because basically anybody can put anything on Kindle Unlimited these days. You can always look up the author, and if there's criticism to be found, people will have said something about it. There will be some sort of critique. Read the reviews, look them up on Reddit, so you can just in Google, type the author's name and Reddit, Reddit, and something will come up where people have been talking about this person. And I find that that's a good way to kind of get the public's perspective on something. You might end up in a page just for them, but you might find another page where hey, has anybody read so-and-so's books before? Did you find them helpful? Yeah. And see what people are saying about it. Also read their Wikipedia page, because oftentimes they will include people who have criticized or said hey, we don't really think these things are true or whatnot. And I have found that to be very helpful, especially, and maybe this is the skeptic in me, especially when I feel I'm about to go all in on somebody. I'm oh yes, I love this book. I'm let me Google them and just make sure they're not problematic, child.
Yeah, this is particularly important because a lot of these books that are in this kind of niche, this kind of esoteric knowledge space, there's not a lot of other sources, you can't really cross-reference as much. And so for me, I like to go into Amazon. I like to filter to the 1-star reviews and see what the biggest critics are saying before I fully commit. Okay, what you criticizing them on? All right, you say that. All right, well, I don't really agree with your 1-star review, so I think I'm gonna go ahead and buy it. But I at least want to see what you're saying, Can
I tell my favorite 1-star review?
Absolutely.
You know which one I'm talking about?
I do know which one.
Okay,
go for it.
We're gonna talk about this topic one day.
One day, this episode is cooking, but it's just not ready yet. It's still
in a slow cook. It's in a crock pot. So I was getting into the Akashic Records. If you know, you know.
real quick, it's an ethereal library that houses all of the information that has existed for and will exist.
Yes. So I'm looking into it, and this was the period of time where I was like, I'll just buy a book about it. And so I was looking into books, and there was a book on the Akashic Records, and I was reading through the reviews, and there was a 1-star review, and it said, "Don't buy this book. I read it, and it trapped my soul. And I don't know how I'm going to get out." And that was a little alarming.
Mm-hmm.
But then I was like, baby, your soul is trapped and you still had time to get this review off on Amazon? Like, what are you talking about?
Oh my goodness.
But that is by far my favorite 1-star review. I didn't buy that book, just in case. But
I feel like it's a big conspiracy by this far right Christian cult that's going on to all of the esoteric books and writing stuff like that. That's my like really random conspiracy theory, but we don't have to go into that today.
One more thing that I will say in this space of like books and people being published is that you may come across the word pseudoscience, and that word in and of itself can immediately have you thinking, oh, okay, so this is a bunch of bullshit. But pseudoscience is a term, and I found an article that it's there's a lot of gray in that term, and there isn't a clear definition of that term. But the definition that I tend to turn to is that basically this claim can't be verified with the scientific method, which also means that it can't be disproven either, right? Like if I told you eating Sour Punch straws, if you know, is great for diabetics, like a doctor would be like, baby, that is unequivocally untrue. We know that high sugar is not good for diabetics.
Absolutely.
But when a scientist, and we've talked about this before, says, talking to your plants lovingly, or talking to water lovingly and talking to water negatively, and you freeze it and you look at the crystals and they look different, that maybe our words and how we speak is very important and very powerful. Just because I can't hypothesize and take that all the way down to a conclusion doesn't mean that it's completely false. Yeah. So when you see pseudoscience, it can be a beige flag on whoever you're looking into, but it doesn't have to be a red flag.
Yeah. Before we move on, we typically say on our show that humanity is an experiment. If you can safely adopt a philosophy of life or start carrying a couple crystals in your pocket and it doesn't harm you or anyone else, why not see if it makes a difference in your life?
Yeah. I think that's the biggest takeaway about all these opinions and facts and things that are being thrown at you, for sure. Now let's move on to spiritual leaders, your pastors, your gurus, your influencers, your yoga instructors. How can you discern who's the real deal? And I think that, I've said before, I'm fascinated by cults because I'm fascinated by how people fall for these people. And I am not arrogant enough to think that I could not fall for someone who's like super charismatic. I think the biggest question to ask yourself to really clue into your discernment is, how does that person make you feel when you're in their presence?
Yeah, I think we've all met someone at some point in time that gave us the heebie-jeebies, and maybe you talked yourself out of it. You were like, this person, I guess. Then you find out later that you were absolutely right when you made that first assessment, right? This is why I say it's really important to tune in with yourself and your body and be less in your mind. Does your stomach start to bubble when you're around this person? If so, then you should probably run. And
to the bathroom.
To the bathroom. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, our bodies are always giving us clues as to whether or not people, places, and things are simply not for you. Like that tightness in your chest, that's not excitement. That's not where excitement lives. That's probably anxiety, my love. Also, you want to pay attention to how the person interacts with others and how others interact with them. If it's getting weird, red flag, If they look like they're soaking up the attention or they get angry when all eyes aren't on them, run.
Yeah, I'll just say this really quickly because we're talking about these body sensations, and some folks who are listening may say, "Well, I'm struggling to really like tune into some of those body sensations."
Mm-hmm.
We've said this before on previous episodes, but that's really one of the strong reasons and benefits that come from a regular meditation practice, where you can spend time dropping out of your mind and into your body. And so if you can start to incorporate more meditation into your daily routine, I think you'll start to feel some of those signals from your body a little bit more easily. So just a quick aside. But back to your point about different people and gurus and spiritual leaders, I'd say like for me, I haven't really been around someone kind of in this new age spirituality space that has kind of given me that reaction. I think I've been able to kind of rely on my discernment, even just like before signing up for this class or this talk or whatever, to be like, this person resonates with me or not. But I will say that kind of pre this journey that we've been on, there have been some pastors that I've been around who, you know, or they maybe weren't the lead pastor, they might have been the associate pastor or something, right? Who I wasn't really like feeling energetically. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I've definitely gotten that vibe before from pastors. Also, like, this is very specific, I think, to the Black Christian church. But I've seen pastors react completely differently to the whole, we want to give you this gift, pastor, for your anniversary, to your, like, why are we celebrating their wedding anniversary?
Mm-hmm.
We can celebrate their anniversary of being the pastor to the church, but like bringing out these very like throne like chairs and putting them on the altar and sitting and having them sit there. I've seen completely different reactions. I've seen a pastor look mildly uncomfortable and being like, "Oh, shucks, guys, okay, that's enough." And then I've seen another one like eat that up. And my takeaway, not from like that one experience, but my overall takeaway from being members of both of those churches was one felt a little bit more in his ego than the other. I've been in yoga classes where there is a sense of superiority, or we said this on the last episode, like there's nothing wrong with being vegan or not partaking in certain types of media or like television or not drinking or whatever. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. What makes it troublesome and where you bring your ego in is where it becomes an inflated sense of self. Like I'm better because I'm vegan. I'm better because I don't drink alcohol. And maybe you're personally better. That's great. But like, I mean, I'm better than you. And if you want to be as good as me, you too would leave those things alone. Yeah. I'm able to connect without those things. Oh, you need ayahuasca? Like, okay. Like, but everybody's journey is their journey. And you have to honor that.
Absolutely. All right, so just to kind of summarize before we go, when it comes to discernment and learning to trust your intuition, you can always, again, sit down and meditate, ask for clarity with respect to a particular person or situation. You don't have to always be overly skeptical, but you should always just slow down, take some breaths, take a step back before jumping completely in.
I think one other tip I would add on to that, just to close it out, is maybe get in the practice of doing full body scans. Like, you know, especially once you leave your home, like you get to work, do a full body scan. Where are you holding? Where do you feel tight? Did you notice this? Did it happen as soon as you walked in the building? Do you feel more at ease when you're in that building? Like, start checking in with your body physically and seeing what it's trying to tell you, because our body is always giving us information. All right, that's the show. Friendly reminder to sign up for our Patreon.
And finally, guys, if you're loving the show, please subscribe and give us 5 stars wherever you listen.
Namaste.